Hi y'all, this is your second video lecture for week 3 in English 110. Before you watch this one, you should have already viewed types of websites, which opens and closes with short little video clips of me. Unfortunately, you don't, or maybe fortunately, you don't get that in this one. We're just going to go ahead and dive right in. I do suggest that you have Word document open or your notes, as always. These substitute for, say, readings in a chapter, right? So lectures are always things you want to take notes on because you're most likely going to see that information again on a quiz, but also be expected to use it in your pod writing groups. Okay, so there are 5 general criteria for evaluating web pages. When we use the databases, as we covered with Lynn and Patrick, the fear of finding scholarly sources that have not been vetted is lessened because scholarly databases filter out all of those that don't meet a certain criteria. But when we're swimming around on the web, we're exposed to 100% of the possibilities that are out there. And so we have to read with our most critical eye. And these are the 5 different criteria that we use to do that. So let's look at them in order. Accuracy is important. And please note on these slides, because they are fairly crowded, that I have highlighted in yellow the most important items. And this goes for most PowerPoints that I convert into lecture notes and post into Moodle. And this basically means that the highlighted parts or the words that are in yellow are the most important bits. So I've sort of pre-annotated a little bit for you because sometimes the slides are crowded. So you'll see that what's highlighted here is who wrote it, what is the purpose, and what qualifies the author in their ideas or arguments that they're making on this web page. If you can find a physical address, literally contact them. That's a very good indication that the person who authored or is responsible for the content that you're seeing on a web page is willing to own it and be responsible for it and defend it. So for instance, if I go to the IRS web page and I click around, I can absolutely find the Department of the Interior. I can find literally the local physical address for my local IRS, so that if I want to drive down there and have a conversation face to face with someone, I can, and they will understand and be responsible for what I've already read and accessed as far as information on their website. Authority is the second criteria. Who published the document? And this basically means who is accountable for what you're seeing. Traditional bylines, like used to be the standard for newspaper articles and books and magazine articles. In other words, it had a title. It said, "This is the title of my work by so and so," hence the word byline. That's very rare to find in a web page. So it takes a little bit of detective work sometimes to figure out who exactly is responsible for the content that you're reading. That's the question. And I have down here a little reminder to check the URLs. Oftentimes when we click around on a website, we are redirected, but we are also shifted from one server to another. So sometimes doing a little close reading of the URL will indicate that you've actually been redirected to someone else's website, which might indicate that the company or the organization or the web page that you're looking at is a subsidiary of someone larger. A good example of this is WebMD, which is actually a subsidiary of a larger company. And most people don't realize that. Objectivity points to point of view and, of course, bias. And again, make sure you've considered what type of website it is. If it's an advocacy website, for instance, this may be very clear and sometimes brutally so. But not everybody is as in your face as websites, for instance, like PETA. Again, love to pick on that. There's no gray area whatsoever in a PETA website or a link, but sometimes ideologies are a little more subtle. So you have to constantly ask yourself, what is the goal? What's the objective? And how far into detailed information are they willing to go in order to persuade me of their opinion? Considering audience, remember, audience plus purpose equals tone. So if you're considering the tone of a piece, try and match it to what you think the target or intended audience would be, because that's often not the target or not the audience that it's reaching. It might be far wider than the original intended audience. Currency means how up to date the site is. And this literally is sometimes as simple as clicking around in the website to make sure that all of the links work, that there are no misspelled things, that the most recent press release, for instance, is dated 2007. This may or may not be important to what you plan to use the website for. In other words, we're looking at websites to use them as sources of information. So maybe 2007 is not a big deal, but maybe that gap between the date on the web page and the date that you're writing in, it might be an important difference. Also look to other clues within the web text. For instance, on the website, is there a reference to the 2010 Olympic Games? Or is it 2008 Olympic Games? In other words, if they're talking about steroids in professional sports, things have changed since those Olympic Games, right? Regulations have been altered, and not every regulation on an Olympic committee is the same as, say, the steroid or substance abuse regulations that exist in Major League Baseball, for example. And the final criteria category for evaluating websites is coverage. And this requires sometimes the most critical eye of all. So let's talk about each of these 4 bullets in order. First and foremost, are there citations? Are there citations at all? And if they are they active links where you can click on them and go and see the sources that these authors used to promote their ideas and information? So one of the ways, or one of the reasons that a website may not have a byline is because perhaps it has multiple authors. So perhaps it is a wellness website that talks about the best ways to lower your blood pressure. And the organization that sponsors the website, perhaps even the American Heart Association, has asked, say, doctors around the country to dial in and give advice, and then they've sort of sampled from these pieces of advice, and then they've put them in a collaborative website that seems to cover all of the bases, right? So these doctors might have biographies. Their names, for instance, might be links themselves. Again, clicking around on them also points to currency. If you click on a doctor's name and it says this link is broken or this site no longer exists, there are several reasons for broken links, and it's not necessarily just outdated information. But that doctor might not want to be associated with that website. There are several ways a hyperlink can be broken. So click around and see whether or not their sources stack up. Does a page ever require special software to view the information? This should always send up red flags for you, as Elon students, a huge hunk of your tuition pays for your access to databases. So the information should always be free. The New York Times website is a very good example of this. Oftentimes you can go straight to thenewyorktimes.com and you'll find an article and you'll read about 3 paragraphs of it. And then all of a sudden it cuts you off and says, in order to read this article in its entirety, click here to subscribe. Don't ever do this. Elon has these subscriptions, and you can absolutely get access to that full article, perhaps by taking the title and the name or the number of the volume, in other words, what edition it was published in, and plugging that information into one of the Elon databases and you'll get the full article. And if you ever stumble with this sort of thing, if you are prompted for a software download, don't do it. If you're prompted for a subscription, don't do it. Contact someone in Belk. Your library liaison or anyone at the circulation desk can help you get the information through a database that will give you full access. Also, if there is an option for text only or frames that give you text only, in other words, they give you frame by frame, that's important, and think carefully about whether or not you want to select those options. Remember that the difference, one of the biggest differences between a PDF and an HTML document is that HTML has basically been formatted so that it's user-friendly for a computer screen, which often means it's been edited and that graphs, charts, photos have been omitted. So you don't necessarily, very rarely in fact, are you going to want to choose an HTML option if you can get the PDF instead. You should think of a PDF version of an article as a photocopy of the original. Think about a newspaper article or an article that you're reading online. If it came with no visuals whatsoever, would it be as effective? If you're reading a newspaper article about someone who died in a car crash, someone famous, for instance, maybe you're researching celebrity deaths, and Diana, Lady Di, is on your list. Imagine reading all of those articles with no photographs of her or her family or of the crash site. And perhaps that's the thesis that you're working on, is that perhaps sometimes we're drawn to even some gruesome details. Maybe you want to make an argument that that's why there's an increase in our television viewing, for instance, of gruesome and graphic and serial killer shows. You wouldn't think, what does Lady Di have to do with Dexter? But you know what? If you're going to make an argument that there is a cultural connection to our entertainment viewing, then if you have articles with no graphics, no pictures, no images, no charts, it's not going to do you a whole lot of good. It basically doesn't give you the whole picture or all of the information. So be very wary of checking an option that gives you HTML only. PDFs are always preferred, and that goes for all resources, including the ones in the database where you're given an option. Always choose a PDF. PDFs are also typically much more printer friendly because HTML isn't about the printer, it's about how it's viewed and how pretty it can be on a computer screen. Okay, so those are our 5 basic criteria for evaluating web pages. You're going to want to make sure that everyone in your pod has viewed both this video lecture and the one that precedes it before you start your week 3 forum. You're going to be given websites that I expect you to essentially use, or I want you to evaluate them using the criteria that's discussed. So you're going to talk about what type of website it is, how many different types it could be. Remember, not every website fits squarely into a category or genre. It can be both educational and informational and have some advocacy elements all in the same one. So you need to start there and then use the set of criteria just discussed. There'll be a series of questions inside the forum which will guide you on what to do. Open the week 3 forum and whatever color pod you are currently in, click on that pod's thread, and in the thread you'll follow the instructions that are posted there. Remember that meeting face-to-face is the equivalent of attending class. So if you have a pod member who is absent, I completely expect you to rat them out to me and let me know so they can be counted absent. But also, because that's important, that means that only 4 brains were solving a problem versus 5 brains. So I need to know that as well. If you have questions, post them in the coffee shop, because while each pod has a different set of slightly different set of goals and directions, you're all more or less working on the same concepts. And so general questions absolutely should go in the coffee shop so that when I answer them, everyone in the course can see my answers. So Happy researching!